Welcome everybody to this seminar, which I'm very pleased to share. My name is Morten Bøås. I'm working here at NUPI. I'm not going to say very much this morning at all because we have an excellent speaker, Vasu Gounden, which is both the founding father of Accord and also its executive director, who's with us this morning in order to speak about African security challenges and what kind of measures that African states needs to take in order to try to solve some of the security challenges and problems on the continent. As many of you probably know, I mean, Vasu is a prominent analyst of these issues in Africa and a leading intellectual on the continent, and not only on the continent, globally, I would say. So it's Vasu that you come to listen to and not me. So I'll stop here and just give the floor to Vasu. Vasu, please.
When I am going to run for political office, I will employ him to be my campaign manager. Is making me look better than I am. Yeah. I think it is on. Yeah, now it's on. Yeah. Well, I can hear myself, I think. So I'm not sure if you can all hear me or not. No, it is on. Are you picking it up there? I said I have a very loud voice, but they are recording it, so they still want it to be on. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming so early on a Friday morning. Maybe I shouldn't thank you because people like to come early on a Friday morning so they can leave early on a Friday afternoon. And I probably would not have had so many people on a Friday afternoon. So I have two colleagues who are traveling with me, and let me just introduce them also. Kwezi is our senior interventionist specialist who covers many countries on the continent. And has been with Accord now for about 14 years. And Hayden Allen, who is our General Manager Corporate Affairs, who has been with Accord for about 20 years. We are in existence for 24 years, so we will celebrate 25 years next year as an institution working narrowly on conflict management on the continent. So we don't touch issues outside of that. Although my own background is as a human rights lawyer, but we don't move into those arenas. We stick with conflict management, and we operate only in political conflicts on the continent. So this is what we have been doing for the last 24 years. So I won't say too much about Accord, except to say that we have two major divisions in the institution. One is knowledge production, where we are producing Africa's first journal on conflict resolution. It's now in its 16th year. We produce 2 issues a year. And we have a magazine called Conflict Trends, more for practitioners. It's a quarterly magazine. And then we produce a number of occasional papers, etc., like NUPI does. We are very proud that we were ranked last year by Pennsylvania University's annual ranking of think tanks, where they rank about 6,000. Accord was ranked the highest think tank in Africa, and on the global rankings we were number 63. I think a little ahead of NUPI. No, I'm joking. And then we have an interventions department where we are involved on the ground. We have a department that deals with mediation. So we have been involved in mediation in all the major conflicts on the continent, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Burundi, Somalia, South Sudan, Liberia, Sierra Leone. So we are in most of the major conflicts. We started, of course, working with conflicts in South Africa way back in '92. And now we still continue to have a presence in the country, but most of our work is outside of the continent. So mediation was headed by a Burundian woman in Accord. Now she has just left to join the UN, and a position is taken by a Kenyan staffer. We then have peacekeeping, which we have been doing for over 20 years in partnership with NUPI and the Institute for Security Studies in South Africa. So NUPI has been a really long-standing partner of Accord, and we run together with NUPI and ISS the leading civilian dimensions of peacekeeping project globally. So even the UN, as well as the African Union and all of the regional organizations are using our training programs. And then lastly, we have a section on peace building where we are operating in Liberia, Sierra Leone, the DRC, Burundi, and South Sudan. So we cover a number of different areas. We have trained now upwards of about 20,000 people over the 24 years on the continent, ranging from presidents down to grassroots activists on the continent. This is really just to build the capacity for mediation, negotiation in Africa. So all of the rebel groups have been trained by us in negotiations. We don't do military training. We just train them on the peaceful side of things. Our colleague is from the Defense Department. They might be doing the hard security stuff. But we have trained them in negotiations so they can participate. So what I'm going to do today is just to give you a sense. I see some of you are students. Others are probably professors. But you all have an interest, I suspect, in what is going on in Africa. So I will look at where the continent is currently in comparison to your own situation and where you sit as a country, as a continent, Europe, although you are not in the European Union. And then what we see as the prognosis for conflict on the continent and what we will be doing as an institution in order to deal with this over the next 5 to 10 years. So now I must get this right. Okay. So which one do I press? Okay. Okay. And all right. So you will see this picture about 3 times now, because this is really the crux of the problem that we are experiencing in South Africa. So what you have at the center is an elite community made up of the state, people in government, people in the private sector, people in civil society. And this center will range from, and you will see later, 5% in Burundi up to about 35% in South Africa, the center. Then you have a peri-urban area, which is an area that is the people who are experiencing poverty, unemployment, inequality, etc. And then you have the rural area. So if you take your own society, you have had a development going like this. You have had a large agrarian period in your society. You then industrialized and people moved into industrialization, and from industrialization into information, and now of course we're in a new dimension, biotechnology, space, etc., etc. And you find yourselves in this trajectory. Of course, part of your problem with Brexit and what we are witnessing as a swing, many would say, to the right, older people, generally, if you look at Brexit, the vote went, older people voted to exit the EU, younger people voted to remain in the EU. This is, of course, statistics that come out of the UK. Why would that be the case? Because in this trajectory that you see going in this direction, you start to lose these jobs and you pick up these jobs. You lose these jobs and you pick up these jobs. But along the way, you also lose some people. So moving from agricultural to industrial, it's not so difficult, and you don't lose so many jobs because these are low-skilled farm workers, and when you industrialize, you can pick them up into low-skilled industrial jobs, whether that's manufacturing or whatever else. So, and then the children of these people picked up into the information age because you require a higher level of skill going into the information age. And what happened was, when Europe lost a lot of its manufacturing to Asia and other parts of the world, it left behind a lot of people, mainly older people, who could not transition into the information age. That's the backlash that you get here on the continent, in Europe. Now, if we look at stability in society, you are generally looking for these variables to be present in a society. So you need a state with a separation of powers between those who make the laws, the legislature, those who administer it, generally the government, and those who have oversight over the laws, and there should be a separation amongst the three sectors. You then need military and security agencies that are professional and that are under civilian accountability, and then you need strong political parties that are based on values, not on identity. So they should be cross-cutting across identity. And we will leave this presentation, so if those of you want to take it, you can take it on a stick or you can get it in hard copy from NUPI. Then you have a private sector. Your private sector should be sustainable, independent and diverse. So your private sector should operate despite government. If government stops tomorrow, the private sector should continue. It shouldn't operate because of government. Then you need good infrastructure, commercial, financial, and of course physical infrastructure. And then you need a good regulatory environment so that if companies enter into contracts, they know that they can take their contract to court. There's a regulatory environment and they can challenge that. And then you need a civil society that is independent and strong, well-resourced, and represents a diverse set of interest groups, not just political groups, but it can represent sports groups, cultural groups, etc. Now, if you have all of this in place, you need two other things. You need resources to make all of this work, and of course you need skills. And if you have all of this present in a society, there's a greater chance that you will have stability in the society. Now, if you take my own country, South Africa, we have all of this present. We also have resources, so we are funding in South Africa most of our expenses out of our revenue. We borrow very little outside. If we borrow domestically because there's a lot of capital inside the country. But here's where our problem lies, is skills. And so a lot of our problems are at the lower level, municipal level, where we don't have sufficient skills to staff all of the municipal level, but that's also the level at which delivery takes place. And if you don't have skills at that level, and if delivery doesn't take place, you won't be able to deliver to people. So this is essentially what you find in Europe. So if you're looking at your own situation, this is how you will see it. Now, you can't expect to see the same thing in places that are still developing. So if we take the continent, or rather Europe again, what you have is you have a distribution of power and influence amongst the three sectors. So about 40% of people in Europe across the board are in the public sector, government, 30% in the private sector, 30% in civil society. What that's done for you is it's given you a declining population, you have a high urban population, and urbanization was coupled with industrialization, so you had a creation of new jobs. Then you have a high life expectancy, 80 years, infant mortality is low, TB is almost negligent, adult population negligible, suspected malaria negligible, and then you have a high percentage of people that have sanitation both in the urban and the rural areas, and you have a high GDP per capita, and then very few people on less than $2 a day. I have to say that a couple of years ago it was actually negligible. Now it's gone up to 9.8%, which means that it is increasing in Europe poverty, not that it has been at the levels it was. So this is what you see here. Now we come to Africa. Africa is obviously a continent with over 50 states, and so they are in differing stages of development. But if we look largely across the continent, we find that most countries on the continent are still largely agrarian. Except for South Africa, none of the others have significant industrialization. Okay, and if they are in the information age, it's not in the productive side of the information age, it's on the consumer side. So we're linked, networked into the world, we have cell phones, we have all the latest technology, etc., but we're not producing it, we are consuming it. So this is where the continent sits, and what has been the consequences of that? Firstly, there are 5 factors that are exacerbating this particular situation. The first is there is exponential population growth. So whereas you have a declining population in Europe, we have a rapidly increasing population. So we are about 1 billion people in Africa today. By 2040, we will be 2 billion people. 50% of that 2 billion will be young people, and obviously we have to create employment, etc., for them. The second thing that's happening is rapid urbanization. So people are moving to the urban areas. Right now about 37%, but increasing very rapidly. And as you know, UN statistics indicate for the first time in the history of humanity, more people now live in urban areas than in rural areas. And this is again a trend in Africa also. The problem is that in Europe, when you were urbanizing in Europe, you also were industrializing. So as people move from farm jobs, they could move into jobs in factories. Our problem is the rapid urbanization is not coupled with the creation of another economy. So people are rapidly moving into the center, but there's no employment. So they are being unemployed, they're poverty because they don't have means of income, etc. The third thing that is happening, I'll get this right at some point. The third thing that is happening is there is climate change. Okay, and the IPCC report out of the UN indicates that Africa will be worse affected. Although I should add that Africa was the least contributor to carbon emissions globally, but we will now suffer the worst out of all of the carbon emissions. And part of that problem is that, again, with drought and other things, people will move to the center, to nothing again. Okay, and then there is a commodity crisis. So Africa has huge amounts of minerals that the world requires, including oil and other commodities. And it is an extractive continent, so we are a net exporter of raw materials. We don't beneficiate because we have not industrialized. We don't have the ability to beneficiate. And when commodity prices drop, it affects the economies on the continent and affects our ability to deal with all of those problems. And then lastly, there's a global economic slowdown, and that has affected all economies across the world. So take South Africa again. We should be growing between 5 and 7% in order to meet all of our developmental needs. Today, as we speak, we are, the latest statistics that come out, we're growing at 0.3%. Okay, so that's a huge gap again. Now, what happens then is you have this situation. You have got this elite at the center. You've got these people who are rapidly urbanizing in, and you then have people in the rural area affected by drought, etc. So increasing unemployment, increasing inequality that we see on the continent. What is the situation as a result of that? This is the center. We see a rapidly increasing population on the continent. Urbanization happening at a fast rate, but not coupled with anything, but right now about 38%. Life expectancy still very low, infant mortality very high. Still, TB is still a problem, although it should be eradicated. There's enough medication and science in the world for that. HIV, AIDS is still high. Malaria is still a problem, and that should have been eradicated. And then if you look at sanitation, you are at 99%, both in urban and rural. We are 23% in rural and 40% in urban. So those of you who are in a medical field will know that if you don't have proper sanitation, you get attendant medical conditions also. And then GDP per capita, look at yours, is 34,000. Here we're talking about $1,000. And then people living on less than $2 a day, 42% of the continent. Okay, so this is currently what the situation looks like. So if we take South Africa, we have about 35% of people in the center, 65% on the periphery. So let me explain something, because you will see on your television screens that there is an election and then there is violence. And there is not an acceptance of the election, and then everybody says, what is happening in Africa? Are people just, violent? Are they just prone to killing people, etc.? No, that isn't the case. These people in the center have skills, they have access to capital, and they have mobility in society. So if they are in politics here, in the government, and they lose elections, they can move to the private sector, or they can move to civil society, a university, whatever. And so you don't get too much of violence at the center. But for people on the periphery, their position in that they have in a government or municipal government is by virtue of a political party and affiliation. They don't have skills, they don't have access to capital, and so if they lose their position, they lose everything. And a lot of them are supporting extended families. And so, you can only imagine that if the next day you don't have any revenue and you have to support a lot of people, you will also kill to keep that position. So this is where we find the problem. Now, if we take the other countries, and I'll go very quickly to Kenya, 20%, 80%, and Burundi is 5% in the center. And here, most people are in the public sector, and you are in the private sector because of your link to government. So business operates because of government, not despite government. And here in Burundi, if you lose in the center or in the periphery, you lose everything. That's why when you see Burundi, we are always having, at every election, huge amounts of violence, coups, all sorts of things, because people will fight to keep the center or the periphery. The consequences of this is that poverty is increasing, inequality is increasing, unemployment is increasing. The consequences is that we will see conflict in a number of different areas. So we will continue to see armed insurgencies, the transnational spread of radicalized ideologies. Remember that radicalization doesn't just occur on a single day. I mean, you don't wake up one day and people are radicalized. They are radicalized because there is a vacuum. If the governments won't be able to deliver services, somebody will fill that vacuum. And if it is a group that has radical ideologies that fills that vacuum, which generally happens, and they're able to deliver to people, they can then convert people into their own ideologies. So you're going to see a lot of that. Environmental conflicts, drought, deforestation, etc., the migration of persons within and between regions, economic conflicts, competition over resources, socio-economic conflicts, the distribution of power and influence, and the rise in social protest, the politics of power and exclusion, and then you've got identity-driven conflicts, and then transnational crime. So you take the Sahel, after the collapse of Libya, what you now have is a dangerous cocktail of drug traffickers, arms traffickers, and human traffickers in the Sahel region. The consequences of that is what we will see in the next decade or so is increasing violence and death, economic stagnation, destruction of basic infrastructure, humanitarian crisis, overflow of refugees and IDPs, loss of civic identity. How will societies respond? They will respond either through uprisings like you saw in North Africa, in Egypt and elsewhere. They may go to war, as you see in South Sudan and some of the other places, or they might be prone to dialogue. And we are trying to push people more and more to say, let's create spaces for dialogue, let's see what we can do with dialogue. So what are we going to do as an institution over the next 5 years, and I'll end with this, is that we are going to try to mitigate conflict. So the continent is not all gloom and doom. There are many good things that are happening, but the deep structural problems of creating employment, dealing with poverty, dealing with inequality will not take 5 years to do. They will take about 20 years. We sat with economists and we said, how do we resolve this problem of inequality? And they said two things. You have to build infrastructure and you have to educate people. So when you build infrastructure, you're able to create a new economy. So if you have to industrialize, you need energy, right? You need transport. So you know all that infrastructure, a lot of which is lacking on the continent, but rapidly being rolled out. And then you need people who are skilled and educated. So if you create new economies, they can take advantage of that. Again, there's a backlog in education. So both those things are going to take us at least 10, 15, 20 years to do. In the meanwhile, the consequences is going to be this proliferation of conflict. So we have about 15 or 20 years to manage all these conflicts. So what will we be doing as an institution? We will continue to strengthen capacity at the African Union and the regional organizations, as we have been doing over the last 20 years or so. We will now, more importantly, we will build capacities inside countries to mitigate conflict. So we will build mediation capacity amongst church leaders, among school principals, amongst the private sector, people who have gravitas in the society and who can go in and mediate low-level disputes and conflicts in the society. So as I'm not going to go through this, but you know, conflicts, again, they don't just turn to crisis. There is a trajectory of getting there. And what we want to do is to be able to arrest the conflict earlier so that it doesn't turn into a civil war at the end, when then it brings peacekeepers and all the rest of it. We will continue to work with women and enhance the role of women in peace processes. We will continue to work with youth groups because young people are going to be at the front line of a lot of these urban protests, etc. And most often They are exploited either as victims or combatants. We want to take them back into peace processes. And then we will focus on a number of key thematic areas like migration, environment, elections. And then lastly, we will beef up our early warning and analysis capacity to be able to respond to this situation. Of course, for governments on the continent, they have to stay focused on long-term development plans to roll out infrastructure, build good governance, deal with corruption, deal with mismanagement, deal with all of those things. But those things take time. So that was my very quick whirlwind tour of what is happening.
Thanks, Vasu. Fascinating, and I think I have I can stand by my words in the introduction after your talk. So very interesting. We will open it up to the floor. I hope there are plenty of people who would like to engage. So I think we should let the people speak. So please just raise your hand, and it's also good if you can state your affiliation, perhaps. So please.
My name is Kari Uslan, NUPI. Thank you, Vasu, for an excellent presentation, an excellent overview. I have a very broad question, but I was wondering whether you could explore a bit further which conflict, which countries are most at risk, in your opinion, on a short, medium, and long-term perspective. Thank you.
Yes. Please.
Thank you. My name is Katarina. I work for Save the Children Norway. My question is very specific. Could you say something about the current situation in northeast Nigeria? Thank you.
We'll take one more, and then I'll give you an opportunity to reply. Please.
Thank you so much, Vasu. That was really a really excellent overview. My name's Alexandra Wild. I'm an advisor at the UNDP Oslo Governance Centre, which is an applied research centre for on issues related to governance and peace building and prevention of violent extremism. The question I have relates to whether you see social cohesion as a valuable analytical framework for understanding both or the importance of vertical social cohesion in terms of trust between institutions, but also horizontal in terms of trust and tolerance between communities based on varieties of identity, whether it's religion or ethnicity. Because this is an area that we're exploring from a research point of view, and I'm curious as to how Accord positions that area within your work. Thank you.
Okay, so which countries on the continent? I think you have to focus on the large hegemons in the different regions, because collapse in the hegemons means that it sucks the entire region in, because they can be a stabilizing force in their regions. They can also be a force for economic development, etc. So take South Africa, for example, in the SADC region. South Africa can be a catalyst for development in the other countries. So you take Mozambique, from the port of Maputo into South Africa, right up to Johannesburg. There is a road that has been constructed by South Africa in order to move goods from the country out through the port of Maputo and from the port of Maputo into South Africa. So that creates a lifeline for the Mozambican government also to develop. So hegemons are very important because of the clout that they have and the ability to do that. So where are the hegemons? South Africa, of course, in the SADC region. The DRC in Central Africa also, although it also falls in the SADC region, but it is the Central African region that it can boost up because it has all these resources, etc. But it is in a serious problem. It does not have the necessary infrastructure. It is going through an election next year, which is going to be a contested election. There are a lot of problems there, and there have continued to be problems over the last 20 years. So that is one country I think we should all be watching very carefully. Nigeria, for the reasons you have also explained with northeast Nigeria, and just the fact that if you look at Nigeria, economically already its economy has been tanked because it budgeted at $120 a barrel of oil. You're sitting at between $45 and $50 a barrel, so they can't do the kind of things that President Buhari said he was going to do in order to move the country forward. But Nigeria is a stabilizing hegemon in West Africa. I mean, ECOWAS relies heavily on Nigerian troops for stability in the region. So I think, again, Nigeria is a country to watch simply because of some of the fault lines that are sitting there. If you come onto the other side, and I see our colleagues now from, I suspect, from the embassies, but Ethiopia is a hegemon in the Horn of Africa. So it's another country that one has to make sure that there isn't major fault lines in the country. Of course, Kenya and some of the other countries also, we have to make sure that there aren't fault lines. The problem is they all do have fault lines, but they have them at differing levels. Not everybody is at the level of the DRC. And then, of course, there are the countries that are just in conflict. Somalia, for example. We have not been able to find answers to the problems in Somalia. Now, for the last 20-odd years, I was in Somalia for the first time in 1997 in Mogadishu. And we have seen the conflict become increasingly complex and change in nature over time. So whereas it might have been with warlords in 1992, it now has a completely different dimension. So there are those things about how conflicts then morph. So Somalia is an area. Libya. Libya is a big problem because of its impact on the Sahel region and in the belt that stretches all the way from Libya on this side to the Red Sea on the other side. And it just becomes a no man's land. And that cocktail that I talked about of arms traffickers, drug traffickers, human traffickers operating in that area, the radicalization in that area. I mean, Mali becomes a problem because of Libya. Niger then has instability because of that. So you can see the impact that this has. So I think there are a number of countries. We had meetings with your foreign minister yesterday. They were wanting to look at the same questions. But we can also talk about it later to look at what are those priority countries. I'm going to ask Kwesi to talk about Northeast Nigeria briefly, because he at least has a better sense working on that. But let me go to the social cohesion question. I think it's very important, but the last time I was here in Finland, actually, just coincidentally, and I met a South African who is a good friend of mine and the principal of a university. And I was talking about social cohesion, and he made a very profound statement. He said, Vasu, there can be no social cohesion in an unequal society. And I thought about that. Now, last year, the premier of our province appointed a commission to look at social cohesion. I was one of the 4 commissioners appointed to examine whether we are 20 years later as South Africa, are we more cohesive or less cohesive? And given our, coming out of apartheid where we're a divided society, racial conflict, etc., etc. And so we did quite an in-depth investigation. I'll send you the report if you're interested in the report. It's now a public document. And we found that it's not actually that easy because, we had to correct the imbalances of apartheid by putting in place new empowerment policies, etc. That creates resentment amongst the white population. We say, now we are being disadvantaged. Younger white people say, why should we be punished for what our parents did? So there's a whole range of things that become complicated in social cohesion. So I don't think it's that straightforward. It's not so easy to build trust amongst communities, especially in developing countries where there are so many tensions in the society. But I think it is an important thing that we should work towards, you can't just focus on state building without focusing on nation building. And nation building is the component of social cohesion that makes it important to keep the society together. Kwesi, do you want to briefly just say something for a minute or two on North Nigeria, or do you want to take this up with our colleague from Save the Children later?
Please.
You can say something very quickly. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think the situation in northeastern Nigeria is certainly more worrying in the last couple of weeks. The amount of international and regional commitment and action doesn't seem to have extended long enough to address the pressing humanitarian need. The concerns of the humanitarian aid workers in terms of access, in terms of the ability to be able to do what they are meant to be doing doesn't seem to have a complementary level of zeal on the part of the multinational joint task force. But there is something that we need to say if we want to learn lessons from the inability of some people would say the African Union, others would like to put it broadly, say the Africans, about why we have gotten to the stage where we are right now. Many people just simply feel comfortable in referring to the intervention of the few West African states in response to Boko Haram and think it's a victory for our African peace and security architecture. I don't think it is. The reality of the matter is that the multinational joint task force was not created specifically because of Boko Haram, but exactly for the issues that Vasu was referring to here earlier on about fault lines. The first time West Africa had a multinational joint task force, which is a precursor of the response of Africans to Boko Haram right now, was as way back as in 1994. They were not chasing terrorists then. They were not chasing extremists. They were chasing bandits, criminals, a fault line that Vasu was talking about. But primarily because at that point in time, of course, the person who was spearheading that response was Sani Abacha, a dictator himself. So it did not necessarily fall into line of the priorities of ourselves as the outside world or the international community. So we just simply said, well, there's cross-border banditry in that part of the world, let them deal with it. They're a competent government, whatever that may mean. But primarily because of the vacuum that was left when people like Sani Abacha fell, when the institutions and capacities to govern, both politically, economically, and from a security point of view, this created a fertile ground then for extremist groupings such as Boko Haram to emerge and continue to wreak havoc in that part of the world, not only within Nigeria, but within the neighboring countries, as you possibly would know, the footprint of Boko Haram in that part of the world. Now, to get to the point then of what would our vision as an organization be in light of the fact that whatever has proven to be an effective security response is proving to be insufficient when humanitarian aid workers are not in a position to provide the much-needed emergency assistance. The reality of the matter is that when Vasu was talking about building capacities of peace within countries, this is exactly what needs to be happening. Because the respondents, Nigerian Army, Chad, and all of the other members of the Lake Chad Basin Commission, they're not necessarily the best examples of proper political, economic, and security governance themselves. And if we're going to say that, well, they're doing a good job in halting extremism, and we do not hold them to account on their own excesses in terms of mismanagement of their security apparatus, mismanagement of their natural resources, and so forth, we're likely going to be talking of far more greater, far more enduring humanitarian catastrophes.
Thank you. We have time for another round of questions and comments. So, Liv, I guess we just start here and work our way over the room.
Yeah, my name is Odd Evjen. I'm from Norwegian Church Aid. Thanks for a nice and well-founded analysis. Just one question. It seems we're moving from a period of maybe perhaps Afro-optimism into a more distinguished period of Afro-pessimism. And with the Afro-optimism, there was a lot of efforts on, let's say, in general, leave no one behind, the poverty, you know, the inequalities. But with the Afro-pessimism emerging, there's much more emphasis on the protection agenda, on the security agenda, on the migration agenda, kind of make them stay where they are agenda. And kind of also we see a tilting of trending towards foreign policies being a blend of not only the developmental agenda, but the Ministry of Defense, Ministries of Justice. And so in this balancing, moving back towards an Afro-optimism, how do we tilt back into the Afro-optimism agendas?
My name is
Let me just, I'll try to sort of get everybody a chance to speak, but please keep your interventions quite short now.
All right, I'll be very short. My name is Tor Christian Birkeland. I'm from the Christian Council of Norway. I was wondering about the 20 years estimation. It sounds to me like wishful thinking. I'm wondering if it's an actual academic prediction or where the 20 years come from.
Are you able to cope with more questions in a row? Okay.
Kira Gallagher from UIO. My question is on South Africa and the current tensions there that have been building. I was wondering how you would evaluate the risk of escalation in the medium term, and then also the reasons behind this reignition, or if indeed it is a reignition, given the fact that at the forefront has been the youth with Roads Must Fall and Peace Must Fall.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sebastian Fornero from CARE International, and I see that one of your priority of intervention is about working with women, so I would be very interested to hear more about that and how do you see it as a positive role and what actually you plan to do.
Okay, I see that there are still several hands going up, but I think we need to allow you to respond now, and we'll try to make room for a last round of interventions after your...
Let me quickly start with the last one. So I won't answer the question, but yesterday your state secretary, new state secretary, wanted to know also about women, peace and security. My colleague has a 10-page document that documents our work from 95. It's on our website, so he will give you the thing on our website. But it gives you a 10-year, or rather from 95 until now, all that we have done on women, peace and security. And why I say it's good to look at, because it almost paints a picture of what has been happening in that field, because we've done a hell of a lot. That's why it's 10 pages in that particular area. But it lists all the different activities, and the activities give you a trajectory of how this thing has developed. So Hayden will give you the website thing on that, and you can look at it. South Africa is precisely this problem that we see right now. You know, and maybe just to answer your question at the same time, you know, I just told 20 years because it's one generation, right? We have been telling our colleagues in South Sudan for, you know, when they had independence, we have been working with them for about 16 years. And we have said to them, look, you have an opportunity not to reconstruct a country, you have an opportunity to construct a country because there's nothing there. You can do it in one generation. It's possible. South Korea did it in one generation, right, to develop a country. And they had oil resources, they have abundant water, etc. But we also said to them, if you go back to war, for every year you are in war, you will push your development back by at least 10 years. Now, as you know, they have been in war for almost 3 years. So they are not going to take 20 years. I mean, they can take 50 years before they will sort the problems out in South Sudan. Libya will be in conflict for another 20 years. This is my own prediction. Forget about developing over the next 20 years. This is why we were cautioning our colleagues, and I have to add, we were cautioning our colleagues from the United States, the UK, France, and others to say, yes, as much as you dislike this man, and as much as he is such a big problem, we will caution trying to remove him, manage the change in Libya. They did not listen, of course. And today, if you read I think it is the Atlantic interview that they did with Obama, he cites Libya as his greatest failing because they did not listen to those from Africa who were saying, let's manage him and move him out. You know, our own president, Thabo Mbeki at the time, had very, very bad relations with Gaddafi. So if anybody wanted to say, you know, he should go, we were the ones saying he should go. But we were not saying just remove him and not know what will happen the next day. But now you've plunged the place into conflict for 20 years. Okay, so development, I think, you know, it takes a generation, 2 generations, like your own problem I was saying here. When you lost your manufacturing job, it's only the new generation that could transition into the information age. These are young people. The older people who were in the factory jobs remained in that dimension. So it's a generational thing. Whether it's 20 years, 40 years, yes, I think it is optimistic to say 20 years across the board. There are some will take much longer than 20 years to develop. Then let me come to the most important question about Afro-pessimism, Afro-optimism. You are quite right. There was a period where there was huge optimism. I mean, all of us working in the field, etc., you know, the ending of one-party states, dictatorships, the ushering in of multi-party democracy, competitive politics, all of that. What we didn't understand was the context was not completely ready for all that we had introduced. Competitive politics was not something that you can just introduce without having the requisite socio-economic conditions in the society. So today we are sitting, you know, Africa has huge potential. Remember that your big problem in Europe is you have an aging population. So even if you're thinking of Europe being a productive continent, in the future you're going to have to find labor. This is why Angela Merkel did what she did, because she cleverly knew that she also needed young people who could shore up the German economy at some point. The Canadians, last week I was listening to a Canadian talking about selective migration that they had in Canada. They take the highest level of migrants are in Canada. But they were clever enough to figure out that if they have to sustain their economies in the future, they needed not just migrants, but a certain quality of migrants, okay? I don't agree with all of that. You know, people who are suffering anyway. You take them, maybe they'll make a contribution. So you've got that. We have the opposite. We will have 1 billion young people. That's a huge bonus for the continent. So if we are able to do these things, we can put people, you know, into jobs. Then we have just about every resource that is required in the aerospace industry and everything else is sitting in Africa. 60% of coltan, which is used in your cell phones and in the aerospace industry, sit in the DRC. We have the world's deposits of platinum sitting in South Africa and Zimbabwe. We have gold, we have diamonds, we have everything on the continent. It's whether we can move that forward and create new economies and beneficiate that. So the African Union's Agenda 2063 is a plan to put that forward. But we also have to make sure that we have the right leadership with the right vision. So take Ethiopia. I think they're doing great. I think they have huge development in Ethiopia. I've been going there from '93, and I'm amazed when I go there every year just to see the development in Ethiopia. Take Rwanda. Rwanda has done an amazing development in 20 years, coming out of a genocide where 800,000 people were killed. Talk about social cohesion. How do you talk about social cohesion when 800,000 people are killed in 3 months? Not over 20 years. In 3 months, 800,000 killed, and 20 years later you see a country that looks the way Rwanda looks. So it's possible to do it in a generation. It takes leadership, leadership and leadership to be able to do this.
Okay, I think we have room for a couple of more. So one there, one in the back, and then 3. So please, and be short now.
I'll try to. My name is Nasreen Omer, and I'm from Norwegian Refugee Council. I don't have a question, I only have a comment to what you said about African countries being in the information age, and that we, quote, we're not producing, we are consuming. So I just have to say that I disagree a bit, because in the, like some East African countries like Somalia has been able to, like people can do their daily shoppings in a very, in a speedy and digital manner for, I think, the past 5 years. And we already started that in Norway just by, I think, the last year, by you can pay bills through your phone. And this is something that, because of the lack of banking systems in Somalia, people have been forced to be innovative. So that's why I would say people are also producing information in Africa.
Thank you. In the back.
Yeah, Aina from Caritas. I'm just wondering how you see the role for civil society in countries like DRC and Burundi with quite small centers according to your model. So based on your predictions, what should we as NGOs focus on when working there?
Thanks, and then we have a final intervention here.
Hello, thank you for your talk. Bård Ange from the University of Oslo. My question relates to the Afro-pessimism that was brought forward. I imagine that going forward, development will still be key, but that you mentioned preventing destabilization might be an increasingly important point. And I was wondering how external governments and organizations, such as many of those are here today, should change their agenda in order to contribute more than impede to the destabilization part in particular. Thank you.
So let me start with the comment. There's a lot of software being developed. I mean, M-Pesa, for example, in Kenya, Zappa in South Africa. You know, I pay most of my restaurant bills on my cell phone. So, and then Zappa is from South Africa. So there's a lot of software, but we don't produce any cell phones. We don't produce the real major stuff of information technology. With all that coltan sitting on the continent, surely one country should be producing a cell phone. You know, the Brazilians produce their own cell phone. The Chinese produce their own cell phone. So, you know, there are developing countries that are doing that. So we need a lot more investment in education, in research and development, science and technology, all of those things to be able to move. It's not good enough to produce a few software here and there and then believe you're in the information age. You're not. You're still a consumer of it. We're talking about large-scale production in the information age, and really we're not there. I'm a big fan of TED Talk, you know, so every morning I'm kind of, my colleagues said, don't tell people you're on your treadmill listening to TED Talk, because they look at you and say, what is he doing on the treadmill? But anyway, I am on the treadmill in the morning listening to TED Talk. But, you know, and I'm amazed to see that all the people doing amazing stuff in science and technology, in discoveries. But I see very few people from the continent that are doing this stuff. And it worries me that we don't have people who the governments are investing in. If they find talent, they invest in that talent. Now, I have a son who is studying computer engineering. He's a third-year computer engineering student. He has to decide whether he remains there because they're going to invest in him as a government and he will be able to, you know, exploit his talents, or does he go to Silicon Valley? I'd be very sad if he went to Silicon Valley. I want him to remain in the country and contribute to the development in our own country. So I think that's the problem. You know, we are not investing enough to harness the energy and produce. I don't think we don't have the ability to produce. You know, but one country go and create a factory to produce cell phones. The technology exists, just do it and put it there and get people to produce something. The role of civil society. No government is going to be able to resolve all the problems on its own. So what we require now is not this contestation that is continuing to take place between civil society on the one hand, the state on the other hand, you know, all this. It's a contestation that is not getting us anywhere. We need new social contracts. We need new social contracts of cooperation where the state, the civil society, and the private sector are coming together to say, how do we solve problems? We need to have more of a solution-driven approach to society rather than a contestation-driven approach to society. But we're almost like two ships passing through the night. We never communicate. As a court, you know, we walk a tightrope as an organization. We have very, very good relations with governments. We have very good relations with our peers in civil society. And now we're extending that into the private sector because we believe very firmly that you have to have this kind of dialogue amongst these three sectors so that you can build. Governments can't do all the infrastructure that is needed. You need public-private partnerships to be able to do this. The private sector has huge amount of resources. Take South Africa, for example. We don't need foreign direct investment. We have 700 billion rands sitting domestically in domestic capital. We just need to give some confidence to the private sector so that they can get into a partnership, unlock that capital. It's just money sitting, piles of cash that is sitting there doing nothing. They put it into shopping mall, they go and retail a shopping mall, which doesn't need to be retailed, simply because they've got to get rid of the cash so they don't get taxed on the cash. And we are saying put it into education, put it into healthcare, get into a partnership. But you need to build trust and confidence amongst the three sectors. So even yourselves, because I see there's NRC, there's Caritas, there's Christian Aid, Norwegian People's Aid, all of you here. In your collaboration with your colleagues on the ground, start encouraging them to have these new social contracts, to have these new social compacts, not just to take a stand and say, every day stand on the sideline and criticize a government. I'm not saying the governments are innocent. They need to be criticized also. They need to be brought to book. They need to be accountable. But at the same time, also try to find a way to cross the divide. If we continuously have a divide, we'll never move forward. And lastly, just to close, I'd like to think that we shouldn't be talking about Afro-pessimism or Afro-optimism, but we should talk about Afro-realism. And what we see here, the presentation that I gave you, those 5 factors of exponential population growth, urban, that's a reality. It's an objective reality. Nobody can change. It's there. It's happening. Exponential population growth is a mathematical equation. It's compound growth, right? So there's nothing you can do. That's the reality. It's not about pessimism or optimism. The fact that there is poverty at the levels that they are, and the fact that there is inequality and unemployment is a fact. It's not about pessimism or optimism. The quicker we get into the mode of saying, this is the reality, let's be Afro-realists. Let's be positive about the continent and say, how do we change that? How do we harness the energies that are there? How do we take all of that and move forward and start putting solutions on the table? Bring the creative abilities of people, not just the critical abilities of people. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasu, for a fascinating talk, and that also managed to create a very lively and informative discussion. So once more, it's been great to have you here, and great to have you as a friend of NUPI and a long-term partner in our joint Training for Peace program. And talking on behalf of NUPI, I mean, we have collaborated with you and Accord for a number of years, and we look forward to taking that collaboration forward in many years' time.
And we'll sign an agreement.
We are going to sign an agreement just now.
Yes. So thank you to NUPI also. Yes.
We met in Addis.
Yes.
Having dinner with Orinda, my
Exactly.